Hello, my name is Nico Geratsopoulos, and this is my presentation on Isaiah Berlin's concept of freedom. Isaiah Berlin has a unique perspective of freedom, which is worthy of being talked about. Sir Isaiah Berlin is known for many things. He founded a department within Oxford, but his most significant achievement is answering the question, what is freedom? He has a perspective surrounding relative freedom, of which it is broken into two parts: positive freedom and negative freedom. Both of these are essential for a free society within the relative freedom perspective. That's that we have limitations as humans. We can't do everything that we wish or want to do. Isaiah Berlin first talks about positive freedoms, which are the quality choices. They're the choices that bring us more opportunities in the future, and although maybe limited, they open more doors to be put easily in the future. We can see these in many scenarios, like in television, where we have the comedy sketch group Key and Peele. They're not as philosophically talented as Berlin, but they do show us realistic scenarios or exaggerated scenarios that can convey a deeper message. One sketch that they have is the basketball sketch with player Charles Sanders. In this sketch, Charles Sanders is put in a spotlight where he can give an influential message to basically whoever he wants. And instead of choosing to elect for world peace, stop a war, he decides to tell kids ranging from 8 to 11 to go onto the freeway or jump off of their roof. Later, he is put into a press conference where he has to basically address for his actions. This was a negative choice that limited the freedoms of others. First, he has to deliver an apology. This choice put him in a terrible situation where he has less choices. He cannot go places now because he is less liked by others. And he also decreased the freedoms of the many that have died because they can't make choices anymore, because they are dead. So we can observe that positive freedoms are necessary. We need these quality choices when we're talking about others so that we don't pose harm. But how do we fix this? One answer is censorship, or the restriction of speech. We could have stopped Charles from making these statements, which seems logical. However, it is very subject to abuse. Positive freedoms can be said that a tyrannical government can use positive freedoms as their excuse to choose for the good of a society. So, for an example, the National Review talks about how China uses sweatshops as a means of boosting the economy at the price of preventing others from making free choices. China makes these choices for other people, which benefits them, but in the long run, it hurts others. And it takes advantage of criminals, which are subject to unjust laws, as talked about in the National Review. They're people that practice religion or have freedom of speech, and that government, given that authority to choose what's right and wrong, took advantage of that and is now able to choose what people do. And so we see that in conclusion, we need positive freedoms. We need that restriction to choose something that will not harm people, but the people that are restricting our choices need to be put in check because a tyrannical state will take advantage of it. So high quality choices are made by a just, politically free state that will only enforce it to an extent, will still allow for freedoms. Freedoms such as negative freedoms, which is the quantity of choices available to you. This isn't talking about whether they're right or wrong. This is only talking about how you have a multitude of choices. Some of those being working in a sweatshop. Sweatshops are agreed upon terrible places to work. They have working conditions that are very poor. However, they do offer a extensive salary. Choosing to work in a sweatshop is mostly of a decision because you're outweighing your other options. And having these other options to work in, being able to choose whether you want to be a babysitter for less intense work for but less pay, is a part of what Isaiah Berlin defines as freedom. So in the scenario where someone is forced, quote unquote, to work in a sweatshop, he would say that sweatshops should be allowed. The choice is the most important thing that Isaiah sees. So having these variable choices with varying consequences. Working a domestic job, which is safer for your body but less money for you, versus working in a sweatshop, which is the opposite, is the definition of having those negative freedoms. So due to the constraints, the sweatshop is the best option to make, but having the choice is the most essential thing. And so the importance of choice is one thing that Isaiah Berlin stresses. The abundance of choices is varying results. Everything can't point to the one result. That's not choice. But the problem is that the best option may still be negative. And so with a balance of positive and negative freedoms, Isaiah Berlin's perspective gives an almost perfect understanding to relative freedom. But what about absolute freedom? Absolute freedom would be a freedom not subject to the rules of gravity, laws enforced by humans, or basic rules of physics, like not being able to fly. One solution to that is heaven, which we will talk about later. So what is Berlin missing? He talks about understanding the best option under circumstances. However, an absolute freedom should be our goal as humans. It is beyond limitations that define us, in theory giving us the best answer possible. Humans have a desire for perfection. This was talked about Peter Kreeft in his 20 Arguments for the Existence of God. He talks about how humans have a distinct desire for something better than what we have. We need a perfection. And a relative freedom is not the perfection. That perfection is through God and through absolute freedom. And coincidentally, God gives us rules. He says that there is a concept of absolute freedom existing in heaven. There are thousands of texts, billions of followers that all point to making choices leading us to an absolute freedom. And so we are given, under circumstances, we shouldn't just say that this is the right thing for me to do now. People should take into consideration that ultimate goal as for what affects their choices. Maybe they shouldn't work in a sweatshop if it's producing guns, because that would be morally wrong and go against a religion that says you should not do that. However, Berlin doesn't really discuss the supernatural. He's not a theologian, he's an economist. He's focused on the idea of relative freedom. He doesn't answer spiritual questions, but what is available to us as humans. And through Berlin's perspective, there is a greater societal means that can be formed. People can help others under correct positive freedoms while still being happy and fulfilled through negative freedoms. And so we can look at the global importance of this, where within humans' limitations, having a balance makes us the most free. Others are not harmed by our choices. If others aren't harmed by our choices, then we should maximize the number of those choices. I should be able to do whatever I want as long as it doesn't hurt other people and as long as it helps me in the future. We as a society experience many different choices and options, and under a just government, we can help others in a society where people are doing things and not hurting people. And so in conclusion, an ideal relative freedom comes from both positive and negative freedoms, good choices and abundance of choices, while also requiring political freedom where those good choices aren't the only choices that we can make. So a true realistic freedom is when we can help others and do what we want, which coincidentally is what is a society based on Isaiah Berlin's perspective. The end. These are my citations. I referenced the National Review earlier, the Key and Peele sketch, Peter Kreeft's arguments in The Desire for Perfection, and the sweatshops when talking about negative freedoms. Thank you, and yeah.